Hey everyone, my name is Cassidy Retzloff. I'm here to talk to you about whole interval recording today. So to get us started, we're going to talk about the definition that came from the Cooper text. Data is recorded during whole interval recording only if it has occurred during the entire interval. I have only an entire capitalized just to draw extra attention to those because that's a very key component of whole interval recording and a major difference from whole interval to partial, where partial is at any instance during the interval instead of for the duration of the interval. Using whole interval recording, frequency data is not taken, nor is duration. And so the data is going to end up being reported as a percentage using this method as well. To build off of that, we use whole interval recording to represent the proportion of the entire observation period in which the target behavior occurred. And this is best used for continuous behaviors or behaviors that occur at a high rate. And so part of that is because when it's difficult to distinguish one response from another, it makes it a little bit easier when you don't necessarily have to. So like for behaviors that are rocking or rolling back and forth on the floor, like those kinds of things, it's hard to tell when one instance ends and the next one begins. So to just be able to say, okay, it occurred throughout this entire interval. But one thing to watch out for when you're doing that is when you create your operational definition for it, make sure you specify if the behavior pauses for this amount of time, then that interval is not counted. Just because you are looking at duration of if it occurred throughout the entire interval. And there will be an example of this for the one that you need to record on your own without any guidance that I won't talk about at the end. And I'll mention that again, and that'll make a little more sense. It should be noted that this measurement procedure does tend to underestimate the proportion of the observation period that the behavior actually occurred. So just keep that in mind when you choose this method. So to collect the data for this, first you need to determine and define the target behavior. And again, just make sure you specify if the behavior pauses for a certain amount of time where you're not sure if the behavior has ended and restarted. Just specify that within your definition. Determine the duration of each interval. So for my first example, it'll be 5 seconds. But you can use, 5 minutes, you can use 30 seconds, a minute. It's completely up to you and what's appropriate for the amount of time you're doing the procedure in. And so when you're recording the data, observe the behavior and mark an X in each interval that the behavior occurs for the duration of that interval. And a 0 for each interval where the behavior is either absent or it does not occur for the duration of the interval. So to calculate the data for this, once the observation period has ended, you'll count up the number of intervals the target behavior occurred for that duration of the interval. And then you'll divide the number of the occurrences by the total number of intervals. And then you'll multiply that quotient by 100 to get the percentage. And so these 3 steps are just broken down into an equation for visual learners who it just might make it a little bit easier. You can plug the numbers into it that way instead. So moving on, I will do my example. So for this one, the target behavior is hand flailing, which is defined as any instance both of the baby's hands move independently of one another without making any contact between the two. So if the hands touch, this is no longer considered hand flailing. So just kind of be on the lookout for that while you're watching the video. And so the duration of each interval is going to be 5 seconds for this one. And so for this video, I will also count out the intervals for you, just so you don't have to worry about watching a timer and recording the data. So whenever you hear me say a number, that means that the previous section has ended and that one has begun. So I'll start off by saying 1, and that'll be for the first interval and so on. So after you've watched the video, then my information with the interval recording with that little table will be posted up here, as well as the ways to calculate the percentage. I'm just keeping those hidden from you right now so that way you can more honestly record and then evaluate your performance at the end. So here goes the video. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Stop recording. Okay, and so here's the table that I took my data in. So the behavior occurred for the duration of the first 6 intervals, and then during 7 and 8, the baby was still moving its hands. However, the hands did make contact with one another, so those intervals did not count, so they were scored as zeros. So therefore, the total number of intervals the behavior occurred is 6, and the total intervals is 8. So 6 divided by 8, you will get, well, times 100 would get you to 75% for the percentage of the behavior. Moving on from that is now going to be the independent practice example. So this is a 3-minute video. Use 10-second intervals and complete the steps described previously throughout this presentation to implement this measurement method. I'm not going to count out the intervals during this video as I did during the example video. I want you to get practice doing that. So pull out a stopwatch or a timer so you know when each interval has ended, and you can move on to the next one. Excuse me. So the target behavior is pacing for this video, and that's defined as movement by the dog from place to place without cessation of movement for any period longer than 2 seconds. So should the dog sit or stand still for anything longer than 2 seconds, then the behavior has not occurred for the duration of that interval, and that interval needs to be marked as a 0 rather than with an X. Please note that due to some visibility issues within this video, my apologies, assume that when you can't see the dog that it is pacing. So if the dog is in one of the other little rooms where I wasn't able to immediately follow it to record it, just assume that it's still pacing. So continue to mark that as an X for that interval if it continues pacing within your line of vision for the remainder of that interval. So good luck. Good luck practicing, and hopefully this video has helped out. Here you go. Alrighty, and that wraps up the end of the video as well as the end of my presentation. I look forward to your comments on the discussion posts, and thank you again for watching. Have a great day, you guys.